everybody, Jason here of GhostbustersNews.com, and as always, Ghostbusters News right here on YouTube. And today we're taking a look at the brand new Ghostbusters Afterlife Fright Feature line from Hasbro. That's right, Phoebe, Trevor, Lucky, Podcast, they're all here. But before we get into today's unboxing and the review, I do want to give you a quick heads up that today's video is sponsored by the folks over at EntertainmentEarth.com. Now, Entertainment Earth, they've got tons of new Ghostbusters products in stock, as well taking pre-orders on some of the must-have items hitting next year. If you'd like to shop at EntertainmentEarth.com, we do have an affiliate link, and it can be found right down below in this video's description. Now let's go ahead and focus back in on the Fright Feature figures. Once again, there are 4 in this line. We've got Phoebe, Trevor, Lucky, and Podcast. And if you checked out a review of the first wave of Hasbro Fright Feature figures, or if you bought some yourself, you'll notice that the packaging here is pretty much identical, with the Afterlife logo, the caution striping. And seeing that we are taking a look at Phoebe, let's go ahead and start with her. And first impressions here, I love the way this figure looks. The Fright Feature line, they have this kind of like animated cartoon style to them. And speaking of animated renditions and cartoon characters, at the front of each package you'll see a drawing of that identifiable character. In this case, once again, we got Phoebe. Now inside the packaging you're also going to find a Proton Pack as well a unique pack-in ghost. And with Phoebe, we're getting Muncher. And when it comes to Hasbro's Fright Feature toy line, it's the actual ghosts that carry the Fright Feature. And turning the box around to the back here, you get a pretty good indicator as to what that Fright Feature is for Muncher. On top of that, there's also a pretty brief bio for Phoebe that reads, Phoebe has a love of science and a deep curiosity for the world around her. Now moving on from there, we got a Thin Wolfhard himself, we have got Trevor. And man, even in action figure form, I am so jealous of Thin Wolfhard's curly brown locks. And Trevor's Pack-in Ghost, it's unique in the sense that I've never seen this thing ever before. Like, I've watched Afterlife several times, and I'm pretty sure this thing is not in Afterlife. On the back of the packaging, you can see the ghost mouth is actually going to open up, and then some kind of like little blue smaller ghost is going to come out of the front. Once again, we'll take a look at that later in the video. And Trevor's bio reads, Trevor is a gearhead who loves fast cars and longs for adventure. As well, if you've already watched Ghostbusters Afterlife, you know he likes girls too. In fact, he's got an eye for Lucky. Now, Lucky in the movie was played by Celeste O'Connor, and even though these characters do look like animated incarnations of the actors, this figure does really look like Celeste. And what kind of ghost does she come with here? It looks like there's like brains on top, tentacles at the bottom, teeth in between. Let's go ahead and turn the package around and see this Fright Feature. It looks like the teeth open up, revealing like a head, but then also the brain lifts up, revealing another head, at least I assume it is, because there's eyes. Yeah, I can't wait to unbox this one. Lucky's bio here reads, Lucky works at the local Roller Hop Diner and isn't afraid to stir up a little trouble. Now coming up next, we've got my man Logan Kim, we got Podcast. I like the look of this character overall, especially how they included that really high hair. But what makes Podcast even sweeter is the Pack-in Ghost, which you can see is the Bug-Eye Ghost. Yeah, the same Bug-Eye Ghost that we saw years ago in Kenner's Real Ghostbusters toy line. And of course also saw a re-release as part of Hasbro's Real Ghostbusters Kenner Classics toy line. But turning the box around to the back, you'll see Bug-Eye this time around, his eye actually doesn't pop out of his head. Instead, he splits down the middle, revealing a pretty freaky looking green skeleton. And it looks like his eyes actually can spin back and forth. Podcast's bio reads, Podcast loves a good conspiracy theory and shares them all on his self-made podcast. I think I may have just said podcast a little too much there in that last sentence or two. Let's go ahead and unbox these. Now, out of the box, the first thing I noticed here was each one of these characters do come with unique sculpts, which is a huge win because the first line that came out that was dedicated to the original 1984 Ghostbusters, they reused the same body molds for all 4 figures. And we're going to show you that a little later on in this video. But yeah, I'm so glad that Hasbro went all in on this Ghostbusters Afterlife line. And being that each character does feature unique sculpts, they could really get the detail in there when it came to the flight suits. For example, you're going to notice that Phoebe's flight suit is really baggy. Which makes sense, I mean, she's wearing her grandfather Egon Spengler's flight suit, and he was a tall guy. So the sleeves, the legs, you can see that they've been rolled up. Similar treatment when it comes to Podcast too. He's a smaller guy, so once again, arms, sleeves, they're rolled up. Trevor doesn't really have that same problem, at least when it comes to the leg department, but he has chosen to roll the sleeves up here, once again making the line a little bit more diverse, which I do appreciate. And actually, now that I'm looking at the Trevor figure, I'm pretty sure the torso that he has is the same torso that was used on the '84 Ghostbusters as part of the first Fright Feature wave. And then last, we've got Lucky, who I gotta say has probably the most traditional looking attire overall. I mean, the belt's a little different, sure, but nothing seems too overly baggy on her. And I love that she's tucking the pant legs into the boots. It's also great to see that Hasbro picked up on some very small, minute details that we saw in Afterlife, including the name tags, because once again, going back to Phoebe here, you'll see that across her chest, she does have the Spengler name tag. But jumping over to Trevor and Lucky, they got nothing across their chest, which is accurate, once again, to what we saw in the movie. And then moving over here to Podcast, we've got Podcast written across the chest. And once again, it's like this in the movie. Now, we never actually saw him write Podcast on the suit. I'm actually really curious as to if there's maybe a deleted scene that kind of shows him doing that. Like maybe he's talking to Phoebe and she's jealous that hers says Spengler. I'm really hoping that there's a deleted scene of that, and we'll see it, in the eventual Blu-ray when it comes out next year. Now, as mentioned before, each character does have a pack-in Proton Pack, and it is the exact same black Proton Pack that we saw with the first wave of Fright Feature figures. Absolutely nothing has changed here. There is no paint app to it. Once again, it is all black. But for such a budget line here, the detail work on it does look really nice. Keeping with that, the Neutrino wand, it's not going to set the world on fire by any means. It's pretty simple, it's pretty basic, but it gets the job done. And speaking of the Neutrino wand, you can holster it to the back of the Proton Pack. Let's just get it out of Phoebe's hand here. And then there's a little peg that you just kind of rest it on, and there you go. So we got the wand now holstered to the pack. Now, much like in our first review of the Fright Feature figures, I want to give you a heads up. You can see it right here. The wand is made of a very soft plastic, so the cable does cause the actual handle to bend a little bit. Now, moving on here, I think it's time to talk about what I've really been waiting to talk about, and that is the Ghostbusters Afterlife Fright Feature Pack-In Ghosts. Since there are 4 figures, we got 4 ghosts here from left to right. Once again, we've got Muncher, who comes with Phoebe, this insect green-blue thing that comes with Trevor, this brain tentacle teeth beast that comes with Lucky, and then lastly, we got the Bug-Eye Ghost, who comes packed in with Podcast. Now, on the back of each ghost, you will see a little button, and that button is what's going to activate the Ghost Fright Feature. Now, let's give you a quick once-over of each Ghost Fright Feature. First, starting with Muncher here, and I gotta say, actually, Muncher looks pretty grotesque. In all the other toys and action figures, he's always looked pretty cute and adorable. I'm actually quite happy that Hasbro went the other way with that, especially for the Fright Feature line. Alright, so we got Muncher here. Let's go ahead and hit the button on the back. And you can see the mouth opens up there. And what that is in his mouth is a ton of scrap metal. So the idea here is pretty much what we saw in the film. He's spitting metal at the Ghostbusters. And then moving on from there, once again, we've got this little green-blue alien-looking thing. And I kind of call it an alien thing because it reminds me of something that I would see in Men in Black rather than Ghostbusters. But its Fright Feature is pretty similar to Muncher. You hit the little button on the back there, it opens up, and then you can see this really small little blue ghost come out of his mouth. I mean, it's pretty disgusting, it's pretty funky, I love it. Now up next, we got the Brain Teeth Tentacle Ghost. I love the design on this, I love the sculpt. The brain in particular, and also the tentacles, do remind me of something that we would see out of like the old school Real Ghostbusters Kenner toy line. So this thing is honestly already a win for me. And then hitting the button on the back here, you're gonna see it reveals a head hidden in between the teeth. Actually, that's more of like a little skull inside of there. And that skull has 2 eyeballs, and then up top where the brain opened up, reveals 3 additional eyeballs. And lastly, we're gonna move over to the moment I've been waiting for this whole video, the return of the Bug-Eye Ghost. Which, if you haven't seen Ghostbusters Afterlife, spoiler alert, he's in Ghostbusters Afterlife. And as I said earlier, this rendition of Bug-Eye, his eye doesn't actually pop out. Instead, you'll see it right here, he splits right down the middle, revealing this really disgusting green skeleton on the inside. As well, if you keep hitting the button on the back, you'll see that you can actually flip in between the 2 different eyeballs. Now let's go ahead and bring in the very first wave of Hasbro Ghostbusters Fright Feature figures, consisting of Egon Spengler, Peter Venkman, Winston Zeddemore, and Ray Stantz. And I already said it in my review of these figures, and if you want to check out that review, we have it down below in this video's description. But I love them. Much like the Afterlife figures, these really do give me fond memories of the old school Kenner toy line, with their basic, 5 points of articulation and the body sculpts. And as we mentioned earlier in the video, the biggest negative when it came to this series is the fact that every character uses the same body sculpt. The only change here is the name tags and, of course, the unique sculpted heads. And that's why I'm so glad to see that Hasbro, they put that extra effort in to the Afterlife figures. I mean, given there's so much diversity when it comes to the cast, I guess they had to, but I really feel like they did go the extra mile here, even righting a few wrongs and adding some extra detail here and there. For example, right here we've got Phoebe and Egon next to each other, and you'll see with the first wave, the actual elbow pads, they weren't painted. But with the Afterlife figures, they got the paint detail. And another thing I touched on a little earlier was Trevor's torso. I said I was pretty sure it was the exact same torso from the first wave, which guess what? It turns out it is. But Hasbro went in this time and they actually painted a black shirt underneath the flight suit. They didn't have to do that, but I'm so glad that they did. Now, of course, you cannot have the Ghostbusters without the Ecto-1, And as I previously took a look at here on the channel, Hasbro did release an Ecto-1 playset, which is entirely meant for the Fright Feature line. I mean, they look fantastic here. You can reenact the whole scene where they're trying to bust Muncher, and you can either use the Muncher that gets packed in with Phoebe, or you could actually include like the full-scale massive size Muncher, really whatever you prefer. And as I've mentioned several times in this video, I've compared them to like the old school Kenner toy line, and there's a good reason for that because these figures are totally compatible with the Kenner Ecto-1, or the Hasbro Kenner Classics Real Ghostbusters Ecto-1, whatever you want to call it. So if you're an adult collector, you can create a really fun scene with these in your collection, or if you're a kid, honestly, you're gonna have a ball. And while we're comparing Ectos, let's go ahead and bring out the AMC Ghostbusters Afterlife Ecto-1 popcorn container, because I saw this on the shelf, and I gotta say, the scale here is pretty much perfect to these Fright Features. It looks so good. Once again, such a great display piece. I'll be honest, these toys, the Fright Feature line, they're my favorite Ghostbusters toy line in a very, very long time. I love the way Hasbro has kind of represented the Ghostbusters, both the '84 film and Afterlife, and to me, it is the spiritual successor to the old school Real Ghostbusters Kenner line. Now, as I mentioned earlier, today's video is sponsored by EntertainmentEarth.com. If you'd like to pick up some Ghostbusters Fright Feature figures, take a look at what else Hasbro has to offer, and also other toy lines as well, be sure to shop EntertainmentEarth.com today. As I've already mentioned, we got that link down below in this video's description. Now that's all I've got for you here right now. As always, be sure to subscribe to Ghostbusters News here on YouTube. Bust that bell notification icon to stay up to date with everything that's happening within the Ghostbusters world. If you'd like to join up with Ghostbusters News, check out our Patreon page. We've got a link to that down below in this video's description. And I'll see everybody right back here next time.